She boarded the plane with a baby in her arms and dignity in her stride, never expecting that one question could shatter her entire flight. Why was her first-class seat reassigned without explanation? Why did a calm voice asking for fairness get labeled as aggressive? And how does a mother end up accused, humiliated, and slapped in front of a cabin full of silent strangers? Was it a misunderstanding or something far more familiar? What would you do if the world turned against you, not because of what you did, but because of who they assumed you were? This is the story of Sierra Langston, a mother, a self-made CEO, and a woman whose strength was mistaken for threat. What happened on that flight would uncover not just the truth behind a violent act, but the deeper lies that often go unchecked in the sky and on the ground. So before you buckle up, ask yourself, what if this happened to your wife, your sister, your mother? If this story grabs your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because this isn't just a flight story, it's a reality check. Let's get into it. The Los Angeles sky was still soft with morning haze when Sierra Langston stepped onto the jet bridge. Baby Noah nestled against her chest. She adjusted the soft wrap snug around her torso, pressing a palm gently to her son's back as he shifted in sleep. The plane door loomed ahead like a promise of peace, of a weekend she and her husband had talked about for nearly a year, their first getaway since Noah's birth. She was tired, but a good kind of tired, the kind that comes with having made it through something hard. Sierra inhaled slowly, grounding herself. Everything about this trip had been carefully planned. The flight, the hotel in Manhattan, the reservation at the quiet rooftop restaurant Julian loved. He was already in New York for meetings, and she was meeting him there. This trip, just the two of them, felt like a reward for years of effort. The flight attendant at the door smiled at the couple ahead, but barely looked at Sierra as she stepped on board. "Morning," Sierra offered softly. "Yeah," the woman replied without meeting her eyes. Sierra paused for a second, blinked, then moved forward. Maybe the woman was having a rough morning. She wasn't here to make assumptions. She just wanted to get to her seat and let Noah sleep through the flight. She glanced at the ticket again. Seat 2A, first class. A small but meaningful splurge, and one she could finally afford without guilt. She had booked early, cashed in miles, double-checked the itinerary. She had earned this moment. But as she approached row 2, something wasn't right. A man was already seated in 2A. He didn't look up from his tablet. Sierra stopped, puzzled, and turned to the flight attendant standing by the galley. "Excuse me," she said politely. "I think there's a mix-up. My seat is 2A. The attendant looked her over. "Can I see your boarding pass?" "Of course." Sierra handed it over carefully, balancing Noah with one arm. The woman's eyes scanned the pass. Then her face twitched slightly, a flicker of something Sierra couldn't name. "You've been reassigned," she said curtly. "You're in 32D now." "I'm sorry," Sierra's voice was calm, but unsure. "There must be some mistake. I booked 2A. We had a last-minute equipment change. It happens. You'll need to find your new seat. It's in the back. No apology. No explanation beyond that." Sierra felt a subtle heat rise in her chest. She looked down at Noah, then back up. "I understand changes happen," she said, her voice still low, respectful, "but I wasn't notified, and I booked this seat specifically. I have a baby, and I need space. Ma'am, we need to keep boarding moving." The attendant snapped. "You're holding up the line." Sierra stepped aside, swallowing the lump in her throat. She tried to stay composed. She had learned long ago that tone, even more than words, could turn an inconvenience into a conflict, especially for women who looked like her. People were watching now, some curious, some annoyed. No one spoke. She took a breath. Can I just speak with someone about the reassignment? There's nothing to discuss. It's a seat change. Happens every day. A younger flight attendant appeared behind the first one, whispering something into her ear. The first attendant, Kelsey. Her name tag read, gave a look, then shrugged. I'll have to ask you to go to 32D or step off the aircraft. Ma'am, you're being uncooperative. Sierra blinked, stunned. The word stung. Uncooperative. She hadn't yelled, hadn't even raised her voice. All she did was ask a question. Behind her, a man coughed impatiently. Someone else sighed. She felt the invisible pressure of being seen not as a mother trying to resolve a mistake, but as a problem, a disruption. She glanced again at the seat she had paid for. The man now reclining in it looked comfortable, oblivious. Her heart knocked gently against her ribs. Noah stirred, his small face turning toward her chest. She looked down at him, then back at the woman still blocking her way. Something inside her whispered, "Let it go. It's just a seat." But something louder answered, "No. You've spent your whole life being told to move, to wait, to be quiet. Not today." She tightened her grip on Noah and straightened her spine. "I'd like to speak with a supervisor," she said quietly. Kelsey exhaled sharply, stepped back, and tapped her earpiece. A few people craned their necks. No one said a word. No one ever does, Sierra thought. The air inside the plane was growing heavier, not from turbulence, but from attention, the quiet kind that clings to skin like static. As Sierra stepped toward the back of the aircraft, each footfall sounded louder than it should have. Her shoes struck the narrow aisle like accusations. Her hands tightened protectively around Noah, who shifted with a soft grunt of protest. Rows blurred past. People peered from behind headrests and phone screens. Some glanced at her face, others at her baby. But none made room, not in the aisle, not in their expression. 32D, the very back of the plane. She finally reached the row and paused. A man in 32E was already seated, legs spread, elbows owning both armrests. He didn't move. "Excuse me," she said softly. He looked up, barely. "You're on the aisle." "Yes." A sigh. A muttered something under his breath. Then he stood, making a show of it, groaning and shifting, as if she were a burden to his convenience. She offered a small smile, but he didn't meet her eyes. As she sat, Noah stirred again. Sierra pulled a small bottle from the side pocket of her diaper bag and fed him, rocking gently. Her mind raced, trying to catch up to what just happened. How was she in the wrong for asking why her seat had been taken? She glanced back toward the front, from where she sat. She could just barely see Kelsey whispering with another crew member, eyes darting briefly in Sierra's direction. They were laughing. Her chest pinched. She pressed her lips together, resisting the rising ache in her throat. When the drink cart rolled by a few minutes later, the flight attendant handed her a plastic cup of water without a word. No smile, no welcome aboard, just indifference so pointed it felt like a message. The man beside her sniffed. "You're lucky you're flying at all. Flights are overbooked everywhere. Probably just a clerical error." Sierra turned slightly. "I booked that seat months ago. It wasn't overbooked. It was taken." He shrugged. "Still here, though. Maybe next time get a babysitter." She blinked at him, stunned, then turned away. Noah's eyes were wide now, awake. He stared at her face like he understood something had changed. She pressed a soft kiss to his forehead. This wasn't the first time Sierra had been talked down to, not even the 100th. But something about this, the silence, the subtle smiles, the lack of surprise made it feel worse, like everyone expected it, like no one thought it was strange. She replayed the moment at the gate in her mind, the way the first-class seat was taken without explanation, the way her boarding pass was glanced at, dismissed, invalidated with a single sentence, the way she'd been told to move, as if she didn't belong. The logic was brittle. The damage was not. She shifted Noah against her shoulder and pulled out her phone to review her reservation one more time. There it was. First class. Seat 2A. Confirmed. Paid in full. She thought of Julian's voice on the phone 2 nights before. You deserve to fly in comfort. No stress. No crowd. You take care of everyone else. Let me take care of you for once. She had smiled then, grateful. Now that smile felt so far away it could have belonged to someone else. The captain's voice broke through the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be taxiing shortly. Flight time to New York is 5 hours and 10 minutes. 5 hours. 5 hours in this narrow seat, with a baby on her chest, in a space she hadn't paid for emotionally or financially. And still, she had said nothing. She had complied. She had sat down. She had kept calm. All her life. Sierra had learned that if you stayed composed, respectful, professional, the world would at least pretend to listen. Today, it hadn't even pretended. Her thoughts were interrupted by a tap on the shoulder. It was Kelsey, towering above her, arms folded across her chest like a scolding schoolteacher. "Ma'am," she said, voice clipped, "I'm going to have to ask you to speak more quietly. You're disturbing the passenger next to you." Sierra looked around, confused. She hadn't spoken at all. As she started, "You've been flagged as potentially non-compliant," Kelsey added, louder than necessary. A few rows ahead, heads turned. "Let's not escalate this." Sierra blinked. "Escalate." Kelsey leaned in slightly, not quite whispering. "You're lucky we didn't ask you to leave the aircraft. Keep it that way." Noah whimpered at the rising tension. Sierra looked at Kelsey's face and saw no concern, only power, used lightly, lazily, like someone flicking a switch just because they can. The attendant turned and walked off. Sierra's breath caught in her throat. Her face burned with a feeling she couldn't name. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was closer to grief. The slow recognition that you are not seen. Not as a mother. Not as a customer. Not as a human. Not here. Not now. The cabin lights dimmed as the plane finished its ascent, the engines humming with a steady rhythm that usually calmed Sierra. But today, the sound felt hollow, a backdrop to something far more unsettling. She rocked Noah gently, whispering soft lullabies into the crook of his neck. He was still squirming slightly, unsettled by the energy in the space, his soft breath brushing her collarbone. She glanced across the aisle. A couple was watching her with tight expressions, as if she were a disruption they were too polite to name. The woman leaned in toward her partner and whispered something, casting another glance toward Sierra's row. The man shook his head, muttering, "Should have stayed in the back to begin with." Sierra looked down, more out of instinct than shame. She knew better than to respond. The rules had been silently taught since she was a girl. Don't make trouble. Don't feed the fire. Don't give them a reason. She was following all of them, and still. Here she was. Noah let out a soft, startled cry as the plane bumped through some light turbulence. She tightened her arms instinctively around him and pressed her heels into the floor to stay steady. Her hand reached forward to grasp the back of the seat in front of her. But the moment her fingers brushed it, a sharp voice pierced the air. Don't touch me." It was Kelsey again. Sierra's head jerked up. Kelsey had been walking past in the aisle, and Sierra's hand had grazed her forearm in the slight sway of the plane. Barely a touch. An accident. "I didn't," Sierra began, but Kelsey had already taken a step back. Eyes wide, one hand raised dramatically as if she'd been struck. "You put your hands on me," she said, louder now. The air thinned. The man in 32 froze. The couple across the aisle stared, eyes gleaming with something between excitement and dread. "I didn't touch you," Sierra said slowly, carefully. "I was steadying myself during the bump." Kelsey ignored her. She tapped her earpiece and turned toward the galley. "She assaulted me," she said, not even bothering to lower her voice. It happened so fast Sierra barely registered the words. Her body was still mid-motion. Noah now pressed tighter to her chest, his small voice rising into a frightened wail. "I'm holding a baby," she said, her voice trembling. "Why would I?" But Kelsey had already disappeared behind the curtain. Silence followed, thick and charged. Noah began to cry in earnest, now loud and sharp. Sierra bounced him gently, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Shh, I've got you, baby. Mama's here." From the row in front of her came a single scoff. "Unbelievable," someone said under their breath. Sierra's heart pounded. The shame wasn't hers, but it was being draped over her anyway, like a cloak she couldn't shake. Then Kelsey returned. Without preamble, she said, "Ma'am, I'm informing the captain that you physically touched a crew member. You'll be met by airport security when we land." Sierra looked at her, stunned. "What are you talking about? I didn't assault anyone." "You reached out. You made contact. That's enough. I was trying not to fall." "You raised your voice," Kelsey added sharply. "I didn't." Sierra's voice cracked. Noah's cries grew louder. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. Phones were raised now, subtle and slow. She could feel the camera lenses, the silent lenses waiting for the moment she cracked. Sierra's lips parted, but the words felt trapped in her throat. How do you prove you didn't do something? How do you stay calm when everything is designed to make you look angry? She drew in a slow, deep breath, the kind her grandmother used to call her reset breath. "You're never too old or too successful to be mistaken for a threat," Nana had once said, "but you're always strong enough to rise above it." Sierra looked around. No one was speaking for her. No one had intervened. They had all seen it. They had all heard what was said. But no one wanted to challenge the story already being told. The story that she was aggressive, disruptive, problematic. Never mind that she had spoken gently, that her voice had cracked from trying not to cry, not from yelling, that she was holding a child and trying to survive a 5-hour flight with some peace. None of it mattered now. All that mattered was the accusation. The man next to her shifted away slightly, as if afraid he might catch the blame too. His arm slid from the armrest, leaving her completely isolated in the narrow seat that was never meant to be hers. Sierra glanced toward the front of the plane. The first-class curtain swayed slightly in the air conditioning. That was where she was supposed to be. That was where she had paid to be. Instead, she was here, being accused of assault, holding a crying baby, fighting for the truth in a cabin full of strangers who had already made up their minds. The plane was quiet, not the kind of peaceful silence that lulled you into sleep. This was sharper, charged, like the moment before a storm. Sierra felt the air change before anything was said. The weight of gazes, the heat of judgment. Noah had finally quieted, pressed against her chest, his thumb finding his lips. Her hand trembled slightly where it rested on his back. She didn't dare look up. Kelsey had disappeared again, probably into the cockpit. The words assault and security still echoed in Sierra's ears, like distant sirens she couldn't yet see. Her phone sat in her lap, the screen dark. For a moment, she thought about recording. Something. Anything. But she didn't want to scare Noah. She didn't want to seem like she was escalating. That word was already being thrown around like confetti. Escalating. Aggressive. Disruptive. Disruptive, she thought bitterly. A woman trying to stay upright during turbulence was disruptive. A mother trying to explain herself was disruptive. A light tap on her shoulder startled her. She turned. Kelsey was back. Her arms were crossed this time. No smile. No professionalism. Just a steely face stretched too tight over something sour. "I need you to come with me to the galley," she said. Sierra blinked. "Why we need to speak privately? I'm not leaving my seat unless I'm told why. I'm holding my baby." Kelsey's jaw ticked. "So you're refusing to comply again? I'm asking a question." Kelsey leaned in, too close this time. Her voice dropped to a hiss. "You've been a problem since boarding." That word again. Problem. "I didn't do anything," Sierra said, more to herself than anyone else. And then, it happened. Sierra reached to adjust the strap of Noah's wrap as he shifted against her, and her elbow accidentally brushed against Kelsey's arm. It was the softest contact, a glance of fabric, but Kelsey pulled back with a gasp, staggered a step, and shrieked. "She hit me." The cabin froze. Someone gasped audibly. Another passenger dropped their phone. A child in row 10 whimpered. Sierra's heart stopped. She stared at Kelsey, stunned. "What are you talking about? I didn't." But Kelsey had already raised her hand and smacked Sierra hard across the cheek. The sound cracked through the cabin like a dropped tray. Noah jolted, crying out. Sierra's hand flew to her face. Her skin stung hot with the echo of the strike. She blinked. Once. Twice. Kelsey stood over her, breathing hard, her stance defensive like she was bracing for a fight that wasn't coming. Sierra couldn't speak. For a second, no one did. "Then what the hell was that?" a voice shouted from row 8. A man middle-aged. Flannel shirt half rose from his seat. "She hit me first," Kelsey barked, her voice shrill, deflecting. "That's a lie," Sierra whispered. Her voice trembled. Her hands shook. Her chest rose and fell unevenly. "I didn't. I would never." Tears prickled her eyes, not from the pain of the slap, but from the injustice of it, from the humiliation of being struck in front of her baby, from the sudden and overwhelming weight of having no one in her corner. She looked around, but the passengers were frozen, eyes darting between her and Kelsey like watching a bad TV show they didn't know how to turn off. Noah sobbed, high and sharp, inconsolable. Her body moved without thinking, cradling him tighter, whispering his name again and again. She heard the ding of the captain's intercom click on. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a slight delay. Please remain seated. Security will be meeting the aircraft upon landing to assist with a disruptive passenger." Disruptive. That was her label now. A black woman in a soft cotton sweater, holding her child in a wrap, asking why her seat was taken. That's all it had taken. She swallowed hard. Her skin burned, not just from the slap, but from the knowledge that people were watching and doing nothing. Her voice came back slowly, thick with emotion. "Please," she said to no one in particular, "look at the security footage. Ask anyone. I didn't do anything." But the truth was already being rewritten, erased in real time. Kelsey had taken a step back, her chin raised like she'd done something brave. The man in 32E stared straight ahead, pretending not to hear anything. The couple across the aisle whispered behind their hands. Someone behind her muttered, "Bet she's trying to sue." Sierra's lips trembled. Not from fear, from rage, from the realization that she had been cast in a role she never auditioned for: the angry woman, the disruptor, the problem, and no amount of reason or softness would change that. She looked down at Noah, his small body shivering slightly against hers. She couldn't cry. She couldn't scream. She had to hold it all together, not for the cabin, not for the audience of strangers, but for the child whose life she was shaping, second by second, even in moments like this, especially in moments like this. The word echoed through the cabin like a bell only Sierra could hear. Disruptive. That's what the captain called her. Not a passenger, not a mother, not a paying customer. Just a problem to be handled. Filed away. Removed. She sat there, stunned and trembling, one arm around her crying son, the other still clutching her seat as if it might keep her rooted to something real. Her cheek still burned. Her ears still rang. And yet the real pain wasn't physical. It was the way the entire cabin had morphed into a silent jury. No one asked if she was okay. No one asked what had happened. No one even looked her in the eye. They had already chosen sides, the side that made them feel safe, even if it meant ignoring the truth. Kelsey had vanished again. A younger crew member, barely older than a college student, appeared now in her place. His face was pale, his voice neutral, like it had been trained that way. "Ma'am, we need you to remain calm," he said. "Security will meet you at the gate." Sierra shook her head slowly. "I am calm. I've been calm. I didn't do anything. Passengers are feeling uncomfortable," he replied, almost mechanically, "because I'm holding a baby and asking a question." He didn't answer. Noah whimpered again, a broken sound that stabbed straight through her. She rocked him instinctively, kissed his damp forehead, whispered soft things even she couldn't hear over the rush of her thoughts. A few rows ahead, a woman leaned into her partner. "What if she's recording this to sue?" she whispered, too loudly to be discreet. "I bet she does this all the time," the man murmured. "They look for opportunities like this. They—" Sierra's throat tightened. She glanced around, hoping, praying that anyone might say, "I saw it." She didn't do anything wrong. But no one spoke. Phones were out, sure. Some were recording. Some were pretending to scroll. Some were just watching her like she was a side act. They weren't sure whether to feel guilty or entertained by. Her voice cracked when she spoke again. Softer now. "My ticket says first class, seat 2A. I booked it weeks ago. I paid full price. Why was I moved?" The young attendant blinked. "I can't speak to that. Ma'am, it was probably an administrative—" "You don't know," Sierra interrupted. "None of you know. You just assume. I'm asking you to keep your voice down." "My voice isn't raised," she replied, flatly. "You're just not used to hearing someone like me speak clearly." There was no venom in her tone, only clarity. But clarity, she knew, was threatening when it came from the wrong kind of mouth. She adjusted Noah in the wrap again, more for comfort than function, and looked straight ahead. The same man who had spoken up earlier, the one in flannel, was watching again. He opened his mouth slightly, as if he might say something else. But then he looked around and closed it, folded his hands, looked out the window. Cowardice was often dressed in hesitation. Sierra leaned back into her seat and breathed through her nose. It was the only way to keep from breaking down. No one had touched her since the slap. No one had even come to check on the baby, who had cried himself hoarse. She might as well have been sitting in a vacuum. They saw her, but not really. She was a situation, a headline, a social media clip. The seconds crawled by, like hours. Finally, she heard the familiar click of heels in the aisle. Kelsey returned, now standing tall, arms behind her back like this was a formality, like she was performing duty. Behind her, another man in uniform followed, not crew, not a flight marshal, airport security. He didn't look at Sierra as he approached, just stopped at her row and spoke in the tone of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. "Ma'am, you'll need to deplane once we land. You've been identified as a disruptive passenger by the crew." Sierra turned to look at him. He flinched, just slightly. "I wasn't disruptive," she said. "I was slapped." "We'll sort everything out on the ground," he said. "You haven't even heard my side. We're just here to ensure the safety of the flight. Then why are you here for me?" Her voice wavered, just once. He had no answer. She turned away, back to her window. Outside, the clouds looked indifferent. Beautiful. Still. Noah whimpered softly, his tiny fingers curling near her shoulder. She brushed her lips against his hair and whispered, "I've got you. Mama's here, even if nobody else is." The man lingered awkwardly before retreating a step. "Just don't make it harder," he mumbled. Sierra let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. Harder. She had been demoted from her seat, labeled a threat, slapped in front of her child, ignored, erased, all for asking why. And somehow, she was the one who could make it worse. She closed her eyes and let silence wrap around her again. But inside, something was stirring, a quiet flame that had nothing to do with rage and everything to do with truth. This wasn't over. Sierra leaned her head back against the seat. The vibrations of the plane were subtle, but she could feel them like an aftershock through her bones, not from the engines, but from everything that had happened. Her cheek still carried the ghost of Kelsey's slap. The sting was fading now, but the memory wasn't. Noah had finally fallen asleep again. His lashes fluttered softly against his round cheeks, the faintest sigh rising and falling from his parted lips. He looked so peaceful, as if the world hadn't just shown its teeth. She closed her eyes and let her mind drift not as an escape, but as a search for strength. Inoan. She was 10 years old again, sitting on the stoop of her grandmother's duplex in North Tulsa, peeling the label off a Coke bottle while her legs swung over concrete. "Nana," she asked, "how come folks look at me weird when I'm with you at the store?" Her grandmother had paused mid-snap of green beans. "Because, baby," she'd said, "some people got dusty windows in their minds. They look at you through what's been fogging their view for years. You shine too bright. They don't know what to do with that." Even then, Sierra had understood what that meant. She wasn't a stranger to being misunderstood. She had grown up in a neighborhood where dreams had to push through pavement like weeds, hungry and stubborn. Her mother had worked nights at the hospital cafeteria, slept in the afternoons with a towel under the door to keep the light out. Her grandmother raised her while cancer picked at her bones. Still, Sierra went to school every single day. Top of her class, full scholarship to college. She graduated while balancing 2 jobs, a sleeping schedule that barely existed, and hunger that came in waves. In her senior year, she started a side hustle digital branding for small Black-owned businesses, logos, web design, funding decks. She taught herself everything on a borrowed laptop and free Wi-Fi from the library. By the time she turned 30, she was running her own boutique consultancy, Langston & Light, with 40 employees, most of them women, many of them first-gen college grads. She had spoken at universities, sat on equity panels, helped write policies for startups who actually wanted to serve underrepresented communities. She had built something solid, something lasting. And yet, on this flight, none of that had mattered. To these people, she was simply the woman with the baby who wouldn't stop asking questions. Not a founder, not a mother, not someone who deserved the benefit of the doubt. Just a disruption. Sierra opened her eyes again. The cabin was still quiet, save for the rustle of magazines and the occasional beep from a seatbelt sign. Her reflection glinted faintly in the window, tired, taut, eyes rimmed with something deeper than exhaustion. She looked down at Noah again. What would she tell him when he grew older? That his mother had been humiliated and said nothing, that she'd been accused, assaulted, and escorted out like a criminal and just took it. No, she would never lie to him, but she wouldn't let this be the only version of the story either. You come from dignity, she thought, not silence. Her fingers traced lazy circles on Noah's back as she whispered into his sleep. Your mama's tired, but not broken. And even now, something deep inside her spine, maybe from Nana, maybe from her mother, straightened and stiffened, not in rage, in resolve. The young male flight attendant passed by again, eyes flickering over her but not stopping. No more warnings, no apologies either. People were waiting for the plane to land, for the incident to be removed. Sierra realized in that moment that this wasn't really about Kelsey, or even the slap. It was about all the smaller slaps that had come before, the ones that didn't leave marks but left memories. The teacher who asked her if her essay was really hers. The landlord who wouldn't fix the heat because she didn't look like she lived there. The client who called her well-spoken and thought it was a compliment. The security guard who followed her around a boutique while her white coworker walked free. They had all added up, layer by layer. And this flight, this false accusation, this forced silence. It was just another layer, but she wasn't going to let it harden. Not this time. As the plane began to descend, the flight crew prepared the cabin. Kelsey walked by again. She didn't look at Sierra, didn't acknowledge her presence at all. That, somehow, felt worse than the slap, like she had already been erased. Sierra sat up straighter. She hadn't come this far to be erased. Not by one woman. Not by a lie. The plane touched down with a jolt. As it rolled along the tarmac, the cabin came alive. Seat belts clicked, phones lit up, bags were pulled from overheads with practiced impatience. People were already moving on with their day. But Sierra wasn't. She stayed seated, Noah asleep against her chest, his breath still soft and steady. She hadn't moved since the captain announced landing. Her body was calm, but inside, her nerves stood taut like wires. A new kind of stillness had settled over her, not paralysis, but focus. The crew hadn't said another word. No apology, no explanation, just the mechanical voice of the intercom. Please remain seated until the aircraft has come to a complete stop. A security team will be boarding shortly. Passengers shifted in their seats. Some stole glances in her direction. Some leaned away as if her proximity was contagious. Some avoided eye contact altogether, the way people do when they pass someone crying on a sidewalk, not from cruelty, but because looking would make them feel something, and that was too inconvenient. The engine slowed. The doors hissed. The seatbelt sign blinked off. The first security officer stepped into the plane with practiced detachment. He wasn't young, but he wasn't old either, the kind of face that had seen 100 things like this before and had learned to assume the version written in the report was always the truth. He stopped beside row 32. "Sierra Langston." She nodded, quiet, unapologetic. "Please gather your things. We'll speak on the jet bridge." She adjusted Noah carefully, reached under the seat for her diaper bag, and rose slowly. Every motion felt deliberate, rehearsed in the few minutes of descent she had been gifted to center herself. As she stepped into the aisle, the silence returned, a new kind, tight and heavy, like a courtroom just before the verdict. Passengers parted to let her pass. Some stared at her face, searching for anger. They didn't find it, just pain. Some looked away, embarrassed by their own inaction. Others lifted their phones, quiet, subtle, capturing the aftermath of a story they hadn't bothered to understand. A woman from row 4 whispered, "She should have just sat down and stayed quiet." Sierra didn't turn around. She stepped into the jet bridge and out of the artificial chill of the cabin. The air here was different, warmer, more humid, but no less judgmental. She stood quietly while the officer radioed someone. Noah stirred and whimpered. She kissed his cheek. A young gate agent approached from the counter, flanked by a man in a blazer mid-level management. By the look of him, they both had that tight smile, the kind that hides more than it offers. "Ms. Langston," the agent said, "we're still reviewing what happened. In the meantime, we'll rebook you on another flight." "I'm not here for compensation," Sierra replied. Her voice was calm, but clear. "I'm here for truth. I want my seat restored. And I want the employee who slapped me to be held accountable." The agent blinked, not expecting resistance spoken so plainly. "Of course, we take these matters seriously, but we have procedures." Sierra cut her off, her voice still measured. "Let me explain something to you." She adjusted Noah in her arms like something sacred, not fragile precious because it was hers. "I don't raise my voice because silence can scream louder. I don't fight with fists because my strength doesn't live in my arms. It lives in my name, my work, my dignity. And if you think I'm walking out of this quietly after being humiliated in front of my child, you picked the wrong woman." The agent swallowed. We understand." "No'm," Sierra said. "You don't. But you will." She stepped aside, sitting down near the far corner of the gate, not slouched, not small, but tall in stillness. Her posture said, "I belong here, and I'm not going anywhere until this is set right." People passed by. A janitor swept the floor a few feet away and didn't look at her. A business traveler paused, looked, then moved on without a word. To them, she wasn't a customer, not a woman, not a mother. She was a situation, an incident, a disruption. But she stayed, not for justice as a concept, but for Noah. For the next time someone looked at him with the same assumptions that had just slapped her across the face. For every woman who had been taught to stay quiet or be branded angry. For every time the system had erased someone and expected them to thank it for the eraser. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out. Julian, her husband. He had landed, and he was texting. "I'm here. Which gate?" A flicker of light sparked in Sierra's chest. C-19, she replied. Don't come in fast, just come steady. Because the story wasn't over, and she wanted him to see exactly where it needed to begin again. The soft chime of the terminal elevator broke the static silence like a bell cutting through fog. Heads turned as the glass doors parted, and from across the long corridor, a man in a tailored Navy suit stepped out with calm authority. He didn't walk, he moved with purpose. Not fast, not frantic, but focused, like a surgeon approaching the room where his patient waited. His stride didn't ask for space, it created it. Sierra saw him before anyone else did. She rose slowly, shifting Noah in her arms. Her face remained unreadable, but something in her shoulders loosened, not because she needed rescue, but because she was no longer alone. Julian. She breathed. He spotted her instantly and crossed the space between them like a current through water. When he reached her, he didn't say anything right away. He looked at Noah first, brushing a gentle hand along his son's back. Then he met Sierra's eyes. You okay? She hesitated. Then, honestly, no. Julian's jaw flexed once, but he nodded. Okay. Only then did he look at the others around her. The gate agent, the uniform manager, the security officer who had taken a step back the moment he saw Julian appear. Sir, can we help you? The manager asked, voice stiff. Julian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a sleek black leather wallet. He opened it slowly, deliberately, not to threaten, not to boast, but to reveal. Inside was a silver-plated badge, not government, not TSA, but corporate authority. The logo gleamed Langston Air. The name beneath it, Julian A. Langston, the title Chief Executive Officer. There was a pause, then a ripple. The gate agent's face drained of color. The manager took half a step back. Julian's voice was quiet, but sharp, like ice breaking. I was called about a disturbance, he said. No one told me the woman removed from the plane was my wife. The gate agent stammered. We didn't know. Sir, that's the problem, isn't it? He said. You didn't ask. You just assumed. The crowd had thinned by now, but a few travelers nearby slowed down to watch. Someone whispered, That's the CEO. Another murmured, She's his wife. Julian turned to Sierra and took Noah gently from her arms. The baby stirred slightly, but didn't cry, just nestled into his father's chest like he belonged there. Julian looked at Sierra again, brushing his fingers across the faint red imprint still on her cheek. His voice dropped to something low and dangerous. Who put their hands on you? Sierra didn't speak. She didn't have to. Kelsey, who had been lingering near the counter, stiffened. She hadn't been expecting this turn. Her smirk had disappeared. Her mouth opened, then closed. The gate supervisor tried to regain control. Sir, we have procedures. The crew reported she was aggressive. With a 7-month-old in her arms? Julian asked, eyebrows raised. The woman faltered. She was removed for the safety of the flight. She was slapped. A beat. No one mentioned that in the report. The manager mumbled. No, Julian said. I bet they didn't. His eyes swept across the staff. You know how many customer complaints come across my desk, he asked. Thousands. But they're just names and systems. Codes. Flight numbers. Until one of them happens to someone you love. Kelsey tried again. She touched me first. Julian held up a hand. Stop. She brushed your arm, trying to keep her balance during turbulence. Then you hit her. In front of her child. And now you want to defend that with technicalities? Kelsey opened her mouth again, but the words never formed. Julian's voice was lower now, but firmer. Every terminal in this airport is covered by surveillance, including this one, including that plane. And unlike your version of events, the footage doesn't lie. A hush fell again. No one moved. And still, Sierra stood silently at his side. She didn't clutch his arm. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. Because this wasn't about theatrics. This was about truth. And now, truth had shown up in person. A man in a tan coat near the gate counter stepped forward hesitantly. His eyes flicked to Sierra. Then Julian. I saw what happened, he said. She didn't hit anyone. That flight attendant overreacted. She lost control. Another passenger, a woman near the window, added. She just asked a question. That's all. Now the truth began to spill like water breaking through cracks in a dam. People who had been silent before, now finding their courage only once it was safe. Julian didn't smile. He didn't need to. He turned to Sierra, who looked at the people finally speaking up and nodded once. She didn't thank them. Not yet. They were late, and the cost of their silence had already been paid. Still, she held her head high, not because her husband had power, but because she had always had something more precious, dignity under fire, and now everyone could see it. The terminal was uncomfortably still. Even the overhead announcements seemed to hush themselves, like the airport itself had paused to watch what would unfold next. Julian stood with Noah nestled in his arms, a quiet force in a suit. But it was Sierra who stepped forward, her spine straight, her eyes level. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't point fingers. She didn't need to. Let me be clear, she said, calmly. I'm not here because my husband is the CEO. I didn't tell anyone who he was. I didn't wave a name around. I asked a question. I asked why the seat I paid for was taken. I asked why I was moved to the back of the plane. She looked directly at the gate supervisor, who now looked anywhere but at her. I didn't shout. I didn't curse. I didn't threaten. And I didn't hit anyone. But I was slapped. Loudly. Publicly. In front of my child. Kelsey shifted uncomfortably near the side wall, her smirk gone, her hands clasped too tightly. And even then, I didn't scream. I didn't fight back, because I knew exactly how it would look if I did. Sierra turned to face the people standing behind the gate desk. You judged me. You decided I was aggressive, difficult, disruptive, without hearing a word from me. You believed a lie because it fit a story you already had in your heads. No one moved. She took a breath, not to compose herself, but to gather the weight of her next words. You didn't ask who I was. She paused, then said it again, slower. You didn't ask who I was. Then she told them, I am Sierra Langston. I built a business from nothing. From a one-bedroom apartment and a borrowed laptop. I've hired women, trained girls, mentored single mothers. I've spoken at Harvard and Howard. I've worked with city councils to push equity legislation. I have more degrees than you probably guessed and more patience than you probably deserve. She turned slightly, so her voice addressed not just the staff, but the watching travelers who had said nothing while she was removed. But none of that mattered to you. Not because you didn't know, but because you didn't care to ask. Julian remained behind her, silent, not because he was absent, but because he refused to overshadow what needed to come from her voice alone. You looked at me and saw a problem, a woman asking questions, a mother who didn't accept being downgraded without an answer. You saw a color, a tone, a silhouette. You didn't see a human. She turned toward the gate counter and pressed her hand against the metal edge where it had all started. "This is where you erased me," she said. Not with a slap, but with silence. Someone sniffled in the background. Another person lowered their phone. And still. Sierra stood tall. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't begging. She was naming what they'd all chosen not to. Kelsey tried to speak again, but Julian raised a hand. "Don't," he said. "Quiet. Absolute." Then he stepped forward, holding Noah like a flag of peace and purpose. "You see her now. Maybe you even believe her now," he said. "But this never should have taken a badge, or a title, or a uniform. It should have taken decency." He looked at Kelsey, then the gate agent, then the manager, who still hadn't said a word. "You didn't just disrespect my wife. You disrespected your profession, this airline's values, and every customer who trusted you to be fair." Then he looked back at Sierra. His face softened. "But they still don't see what I see." She tilted her head slightly. Curious. "What's that?" "They see a disruption," he said. "I see a woman who held herself together for our son, even when the world tried to split her apart." For a moment, the room breathed. Then Sierra turned back to the group in front of her. "I want your cameras pulled. I want a full report filed. And I want that report to include my full statement, not just the one that makes this easier for you to bury." The gate supervisor opened her mouth, but Sierra was already moving. "And I want my seat, the one I paid for, reinstated on the next flight. Not because I'm someone's wife, but because I'm a paying customer who deserves not to be erased." Silence. Until the woman in the tan coat, the one from earlier, who had stood quietly through it all, stepped forward. "You're right," she said. Her voice was shaky. "I saw what happened. I should have spoken up. I didn't. I'm sorry. It was late. Too late to undo the damage. But it was something." And Sierra didn't look at her with contempt. Just a nod. Enough to say, "I see you. Let's do better next time." Because there would be a next time. That was the problem. But now, there would also be a precedent. The gate supervisor stepped away to make a call. Her hands trembled as she held the radio to her lips, her voice low, clipped, and careful. Sierra stood by, eyes steady. She wasn't pacing, wasn't agitated. She had passed through anger and emerged into something else entirely. Conviction. Julian remained beside her, one arm still cradling Noah, whose head now rested against his chest, thumb gently tucked between his lips. In the quiet, it was the baby's peace that made the most powerful statement. The world had tried to disturb it and failed. The radio crackled. The gate supervisor returned with stiff professionalism. "Footage has been requested from cabin surveillance. I've alerted internal security. It's being reviewed now." Sierra didn't nod. She didn't thank her. She simply said, "Good." More airline staff gathered nearby, whispering behind clipboards and iPads. Most didn't know what was happening, but some of them did. And it showed in their faces not just concern, but shame. The minutes crawled by. Finally, a uniformed man with a Langston Air security badge appeared. His gait was brisk, but his expression was composed. In his hand, he carried a tablet large, company-issued, with a wired strap and a seal on the back. "Mr. Langston, Mrs. Langston. We've reviewed the camera footage from Flight 276. Sierra didn't flinch, and she asked. The man cleared his throat, but not because he was nervous, more like he was choosing his words very carefully. "There is clear video of the moment in question. At no time did you strike or push the flight attendant. The turbulence jostled multiple passengers, and you can be seen reaching forward to steady yourself. Your hand brushes the back of a seat, not the attendant. He turned toward the gathering staff. Some shifted on their feet. However, the video also shows the flight attendant striking Mrs. Langston across the face shortly after a verbal exchange. A gas slipped out from somewhere behind the gate desk. Sierra didn't react. Her hands remained still. Her voice, too. The security officer continued, "We also have audio. There is no indication that Mrs. Langston raised her voice or used threatening language. On the contrary, her tone remained controlled, even while holding an infant." Kelsey, standing nearby, took a step back. Julian didn't turn toward her. His gaze remained fixed on the security officer. "We'll need that footage submitted for HR and legal review," he said calmly. "It's already being uploaded." The officer replied, "Sir, ma'am, we apologize." He said it not like a formality, but like someone who understood the weight of what had almost been allowed to happen. This was nearly escalated into something dangerous. He added, "Had the footage not existed, well, this could have gone another way." Sierra finally spoke. It already did. Her voice was low, but it hit like truth through glass. It went the way it always goes, until the camera proves otherwise. Julian adjusted Noah in his arm, kissed the top of his son's head, and looked at the group. She asked a question. She was slapped. "Then you believed a lie because it was easier than facing your bias." Silence fell again, the kind that left no room for excuses. "And you," Julian said, turning to Kelsey for the first time. "You thought your badge gave you power, but you forgot power without principle is just abuse." Kelsey's eyes brimmed with something tears. Maybe, but they didn't fall. And Sierra didn't look away. She didn't need her to cry. She needed her to learn. One of the passengers from the flight, the woman who had said nothing, now stepped forward. She looked young, early 20s, curly hair pulled into a high bun. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I saw it too. I was in row 10. I wanted to say something, but I didn't want to get involved. I'm sorry." Another man followed. "I saw it from row 7. She didn't do anything wrong. I should have said something earlier." The admissions came slowly, like seeds breaking through hardened soil. Julian looked around, voice steady. The truth doesn't need a spotlight to exist, but it does need people willing to stand in it. He glanced down at Noah and added, "Especially when our children are watching." Sierra exhaled, her shoulders relaxing just slightly. For the first time since the slap, she felt the smallest return of control, not over what happened, but over what came next. The security officer cleared his throat again. "We'd like to escort you to the executive lounge for privacy and file a formal report. Additionally, the crew member will be removed from active flight duty effective immediately pending investigation." It was the first tangible action anyone had taken. Still, Sierra looked at Kelsey not with triumph, but with clarity. "You thought I was alone, that I had no voice. You were wrong on both counts." Kelsey didn't reply. She couldn't, because truth had entered the room, and this time it had receipts. The executive lounge was quiet. Muted lighting, polished furniture, fresh fruit and glass bowls no one touched. A space designed to impress, to signal status, comfort, control. But Sierra didn't sit for comfort. She stood. Noah had fallen asleep again, nestled against Julian's shoulder. The toddler's small fingers still curled gently into his father's collar, like a promise that something innocent still lived here. Even after everything, 2 Langston Air legal representatives sat across from them, shoulders tight, eyes wide, not entirely sure how to handle what had just unfolded. A corporate communications director hovered at the edge of the room, tablet in hand, face drawn with a look that tried to blend apology and calculation. They had offered compensation. Sierra declined. They offered upgrades for a year. She declined that too. She didn't want hush money. She wanted accountability. And she wanted it in words, not gift cards. "You're offering to file an internal report," Sierra said. "That's fine. But I want this addressed publicly, not buried behind policy language. I want it said out loud." The communications director cleared his throat. "With respect, ma'am, we do have to protect employee privacy." Where was that concern when she slapped me in front of a full plane? Sierra asked, her voice calm. "Where was your discretion when I was being marched down the aisle like a criminal?" Holding my child, Julian didn't interrupt. He knew better than to step in when his wife was doing what she was born to do, lead with clarity. The legal rep leaned forward. "What would you like to see happen, Mrs. Langston?" She smiled slightly, not because she found it amusing, but because of how long it had taken for that question to be asked. "I want your airline to make it clear that what happened to me was wrong. Not complicated, not unfortunate, wrong. I want you to name it." She looked directly at the woman with the tablet. "Say it. I was slapped by an employee and falsely accused. Say it." The woman looked at the floor. "If you can't say it, you can't fix it," Sierra added. The room fell still. She continued, voice low, slow, deliberate. "Do you know how many times this happens in small ways? When a woman of color asks a question and is labeled difficult. When we're told to watch our tone just for asking to be treated fairly. When we walk into a room and the respect that should be automatic becomes something we have to earn over and over." No one responded. She took a step forward. Julian gently rocked Noah behind her. "I have spent my whole life being told to be calm in the face of disrespect, to breathe through humiliation, to take the high road while someone else drags my dignity through the dirt. And I have. But today, you will not write this off with a voucher and a statement full of vague regret." She looked at each of them, one by one. "You have a platform. You have influence. If you can't say this was wrong, not as a company, but as people, then you are just as complicit as the woman who hit me." The communications director slowly set her tablet down. "You're right," she said, her voice quieter now. "You're right." Another pause. Then the legal representative nodded. "We'll issue a statement, and we will include your words. If you're willing." "I'm not just willing," Sierra said. "I'll write it myself." She turned, not waiting for their response. She walked to the window, where the runway stretched like a river beneath the setting sun. The sky was turning gold in orange firelight on glass. Beautiful, even in the aftermath. Julian stood behind her, Noah sleeping soundly in his arms. "You were brilliant," he whispered. Sierra exhaled. "I didn't want to be. I just wanted to fly." He reached for her hand. "You didn't raise your voice," he said. "You raised the bar." She looked at her son, then at her own reflection in the glass, a woman with tired eyes, steady hands, and a backbone made from something more ancient than anger. "If I don't do it," she said, "he'll have to." "He won't," Julian replied, "because today you showed him how to stand tall without shouting, how to speak truth that doesn't tremble." Another knock at the door. A younger employee entered, holding a piece of paper. "Miss Langston, your words, the ones you just said, Would you mind reviewing this draft? Sierra took the paper, scanning the first few lines. Today, we acknowledge that a customer, a mother, was wrongly accused, mistreated, and physically harmed aboard one of our flights. She read it silently, then lifted her eyes. I'll finish it myself, she said. The room nodded. Everyone understood. Some truths don't need legal review. They just need to be spoken, out loud, for the world to finally hear. The automatic glass doors parted with a soft hiss as Sierra stepped back into the main terminal. The same gate, the same corridor, the same hushed tones of rolling suitcases and tired footsteps. But everything had changed. Noah was awake now, resting in her arms again, blinking slowly at the soft lights overhead. Julian walked beside her, quiet and present, not leading, not following, but matching her stride. Her head was high, her pace steady. There was no music playing, but it felt like a procession anyway. People parted again, but this time, not out of fear or confusion, out of respect. Someone near the food court stood up and clapped. Just once. A second later, another followed, then another. Not thunderous applause that wasn't her style, but slow, deliberate, real. The kind of recognition that didn't require fanfare. It said, "We saw what they did. We saw how you stood." It said, "Thank you for not shrinking when it would have been easier to disappear." Sierra didn't wave, didn't bow. She simply kept walking. Grace had a weight to it, and she wore it well. At the far end of the terminal, they passed a group of employees in uniform. Some looked away, but a few quietly, cautiously nodded. Even those who hadn't said a word before now understood something had shifted. She reached the exit doors and paused. Julian glanced at her. "You okay?" She took a deep breath. "I'm not angry anymore." And she wasn't. The storm had passed, but the ground beneath her felt more solid now than it had when she boarded that plane. "Because I didn't let it define me," she said, "and I didn't let them rewrite me." She adjusted Noah's wrap, smoothing a wrinkle from the fabric. "He'll grow up not remembering this day, but I'll remember it for both of us." Julian reached for her hand, and she gave it freely. "They thought I was alone," she said, "because I didn't shout, because I didn't fit the part they'd written in their minds. But I wasn't alone, and I never needed to shout." Outside, a sleek black sedan pulled up, not a limousine, not a company car, just a quiet, clean ride home. She turned back once, not to look at the gate or the staff or even the crowd. She looked at the place where she had been erased and then where she had reclaimed herself. "You will not define me. You will not decide what I am allowed to be. You do not own my voice." As they stepped outside into the soft orange light of evening, Sierra felt lighter. Not because the pain was gone, it wasn't, but because she had told her truth and stood in it. She had walked through humiliation without letting it hollow her out. She had fought back not with volume, but with presence. No lawsuit, no screaming match, no viral meltdown. Just a woman, a mother, a movement. 3 weeks later, a video of the incident leaked from a passenger's phone. It spread fast not because of the slap, but because of what happened after. The poise, the words, the stillness that carried more power than rage ever could. Langston Air released a full statement. "We acknowledge that a customer, Mrs. Sierra Langston, was wrongly moved, falsely accused, and physically assaulted by one of our crew members aboard Flight 276. We take full responsibility and have implemented additional training and accountability measures. No one should be punished for speaking up. No one should be disrespected for asking to be treated like a human being. It was the most shared corporate apology of the year. But Sierra never shared it herself. She didn't need to. She had already spoken everything that mattered. To those who still whispered, it was just a misunderstanding, or people overreact online, she had only one answer. Dignity should never depend on proof, but if it has to make sure the cameras are rolling, what you just witnessed wasn't fiction. It was a mirror. A woman held her ground while holding her baby, and still, she was made to feel like she didn't belong. Not because she was wrong, but because someone else's comfort was prioritized over her truth. Sierra didn't fight back with rage. She responded with resolve. She didn't need to prove her worth, but the world forced her to anyway. And when she finally spoke, it wasn't just for her. It was for everyone who's ever been told to sit down, stay quiet, or smile through injustice. This story reminds us dignity should never depend on proof. Respect should never come with conditions. And strength doesn't always shout sometimes. It carries a child and still walks tall. So if this story made you feel something, if it challenged you, opened your eyes, or echoed your own lived experience, then do not let it end here. Like, share, subscribe, and join us as we continue to tell stories that speak truth, demand change, and honor those who carry grace through the fire. Because one story can start a ripple, but many they can make a wave. See you in the next one.